The space station was a place of constant activity. Ships from various planets arrived, unloading cargo, passengers, and trade goods, each adding a new layer of complexity to the bustling environment. It was a place where humans, aliens, and other beings from across the galaxy gathered to discuss treaties, exchange ideas, and sometimes to simply rest before moving on to their next destination. The station was not just a place of business, but a crossroads of countless cultures. Kai had been assigned to work as a human diplomat, a position that required him to interact with all the various races that passed through the station. It was a job full of meetings, negotiations, and dealing with the occasional quarrels between species. But there was one thing that stood out in the sea of interactions. Princess Lyra, the mysterious Zalara royal. The Zalara were a race of towering, elegant beings, known for their advanced technology and their mysterious ways. Their society was built on ancient traditions, and they were regarded as a proud and reclusive people. What made Lyra so intriguing was not just her heritage, but her silence. Despite being the heir to the Zalara throne, she never spoke to anyone. Her presence was one of quiet authority, and even though her people held positions of power across the galaxy, they rarely interacted with others in any meaningful way. Kai had heard the whispers about her. Some said she was aloof, others claimed she was cold and distant. But there were also those who said she was simply misunderstood. There was always a sense of mystery around her, and though Kai had never had the chance to speak to her, he couldn't help but feel drawn to the enigma that was Princess Lyra. It was late one evening when Kai first saw her for himself. He was walking through one of the quieter corridors of the station when he noticed her sitting by a window, gazing out into the stars. The dim light from the station's exterior reflected off her smooth, silvery skin, giving her an almost ethereal glow. She was alone, which was rare for someone of her rank, and she didn't seem to be bothered by the activity happening around her. Kai hesitated for a moment. He had heard the warnings from his colleagues. Don't talk to her. She's dangerous. But as he stood there, watching her, a strange pull stirred inside him. He had always been someone who found comfort in silence, in the absence of words. Maybe that's why he felt drawn to her, because she, too, seemed to understand the power of silence. The others would avoid her, keeping their distance, but Kai found himself stepping forward. There was something different about Lyra, something he couldn't explain. He had met many diplomats, leaders, and royals from various races, but none of them had ever intrigued him the way she did. "Excuse me," Kai said, his voice soft and respectful as he approached her. "Is this seat taken?" Princess Lyra did not turn her head to acknowledge him. She simply nodded ever so slightly, the barest of gestures that invited him to sit. Kai took a deep breath, unsure of what to do next. He sat beside her, feeling the weight of the moment, yet oddly at ease. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together in the quiet, watching the stars outside the window. Kai had grown up on stories of distant worlds and alien beings, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of being in the presence of someone so different.
And yet, there was a peace in the air.
It was as if the silence between them spoke volumes, and in that moment, words felt unnecessary. Eventually, Kai broke the silence.
"I've been told a lot about you,"
he said, his voice calm.
"Some people say you don't speak because you're untouchable.
Others say you don't speak because you can't."
What's the truth? Lyra's eyes shifted toward him, but she did not respond. Her gaze was intense, yet there was no hostility in it. Her eyes seemed to hold a depth of knowledge, as if she had seen more of the universe than most could ever imagine. Kai felt a pang of guilt for speaking so freely, but he also felt the need to understand her. He wasn't asking out of disrespect, but out of curiosity. A curiosity he had never quite felt for anyone else before. When she didn't answer, Kai sat back, unsure of what to do. The silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt natural, as if they were both content to just be in each other's company without needing to fill the space with words. Kai wasn't sure how long they sat there, but eventually, Lyra shifted slightly in her seat. It was a small movement, but it felt significant. Kai watched her, his mind racing with questions. Why did she choose to sit alone? Why did she avoid conversation with others? What was it about her that made her so different from the rest of the Zilara? He had heard that the Zilara were a proud people, their culture rooted in ancient traditions. Perhaps it was those traditions that made her so distant, so silent. But deep down, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Maybe she wasn't just silent because of her people's customs. Maybe she was waiting for someone to speak to her, someone who could understand her without needing her to speak. The silence between them was broken when Lyra finally stood up. She gave him a brief glance, one that seemed to say more than words ever could, before turning and walking away. Kai watched her go, his mind spinning with the possibilities. He had no idea what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. This encounter would not be their last. Days passed after that quiet encounter with Princess Lyra, but Kai couldn't shake the memory of sitting next to her. Every time he walked through the corridors of the space station, he found himself glancing over at the small corner where he had seen her. She was always there, quietly observing, never speaking to anyone. But Kai, for reasons he couldn't fully explain, felt a strong pull toward her. At first it seemed like a strange curiosity, but it soon turned into something deeper. He couldn't understand why she chose to stay so isolated. The others on the station viewed her with suspicion, as if her silence was some form of arrogance or power. But Kai couldn't bring himself to believe that. He had seen her eyes when she looked at him. There was a quiet sadness in them, a kind of loneliness that couldn't be ignored. It was another quiet evening when he found himself once again near her corner. Princess Lyra sat there, staring out the window at the endless stretch of stars. Her posture was regal, but her face was soft, almost lost in thought. Kai hesitated before approaching her again. He didn't want to intrude, but he felt that strange pull once more, as if there was something she was waiting for, something she needed. "Hello again," Kai said, keeping his voice low and respectful. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Lyra didn't look at him right away, but she gave the smallest of nods, acknowledging his presence. Kai took a seat beside her, careful not to invade her space too much. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was peaceful, like two people sharing the same space, without needing words. As they sat there, Kai watched her closely. The rumors about Lyra were endless. Some said she was cursed to be silent, that her people had a tradition of silence among their royals. Others believed she was too proud to speak to anyone who wasn't of her status. But Kai didn't believe any of that. There was something different about her, something real that others couldn't see.
He reached into his bag and pulled out a small book.
It was a human philosophy book that he had been reading in his spare time, filled with thoughts on life, purpose, and the universe. He didn't know why, but he handed it to her. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said quietly. Lyra glanced at the book, and for a moment, Kai thought she would refuse. But then, with a slow and deliberate motion, she took it from him. Her fingers brushed against his, and for the briefest of moments, Kai felt a strange connection between them, something beyond words, beyond what either of them could explain. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a question, as if asking, "Why me?" Kai didn't have an answer, but he felt the need to explain. "It's just a small book. It talks about different cultures, different ways of thinking. I thought you might find it interesting." Lyra opened the book, her eyes scanning the pages, though she didn't seem to be reading the words in the same way Kai did. She looked at the lines, the ideas, and the stories, her mind working in ways Kai couldn't fully comprehend. For a long time she didn't say anything, but when she finally looked up, her gaze was softer, more relaxed. She seemed to be acknowledging something between them, something he couldn't explain. Over the next few days, Kai and Lyra began to share quiet moments like this. He would bring her books, and sometimes she would bring him something in return, a small artifact from her people, or a piece of artwork. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. Each exchange felt like a conversation of its own, a silent bond forming between them that was stronger than any words could convey. One evening, after a long day of diplomatic meetings, Kai was feeling exhausted. He had spent hours negotiating with representatives from various species, trying to find common ground on issues that seemed impossible to resolve. As he walked down the hall, his thoughts heavy with the weight of the day, he found himself once again near Lyra's corner. She was sitting there, just as she always was, staring out at the stars. Without thinking, he sat down beside her, his body instinctively finding its place next to hers. There was a comfort in her presence, a peace that Kai couldn't find anywhere else on the station. The silence between them was familiar now, and it didn't feel awkward or forced. It was simply two people being in the same space, sharing a moment of understanding. For the first time, Kai spoke again, but this time, it wasn't about books or philosophy. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't think I've ever felt more out of place than I do here." He paused, unsure of why he was sharing this with her. But something about the way she was looking at him, the way her gaze seemed to see past the surface, made him feel like it was okay to be vulnerable. Lyra didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her eyes were soft, filled with understanding. She turned slightly, as though to face him more fully, and he felt a strange warmth in her gaze. It was as if she was telling him that she understood. She had never spoken, but in that moment, she was speaking louder than anyone else could. Kai let out a deep breath, the weight of his words finally leaving him. He hadn't realized how much he had been carrying until now. Sitting next to Lyra, in her quiet presence, he felt lighter. He didn't have to be anything other than himself. There were no expectations here, no pressures, just the simple, unspoken connection between them.
"I'm not good at this," Kai admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "This whole diplomat thing."
It's hard. Sometimes. Lyra's eyes never left him, and though she didn't speak, her gaze was full of empathy. It was as if she was telling him that it was okay to struggle, that it was okay to be uncertain. In a way, she was offering him the one thing he had never really asked for: understanding. They sat together in silence for a long time after that. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a peaceful one that allowed Kai to reflect on everything that had happened since meeting Lyra. In her presence, he realized how much he had been searching for something to hold on to. She had become that anchor, not because of any words she had said, but because of the way she made him feel. He didn't know what it was about her that was so different, but he knew that she was more than the rumors. She wasn't cold or distant, as the others had claimed. She was simply waiting for the right person to see her, to understand her without needing her to speak. And for some reason, Kai was that person. As they sat together, the stars outside the window shining brightly, Kai felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in a long time. He didn't know what the future held, or what it meant to be in the presence of a royal alien princess who never spoke. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Lyra was a mystery, and yet she wasn't. She was a person, just like him, trying to find her place in a world full of noise. And in that silence they found something special, an understanding that went beyond words. The days on the space station had begun to feel like they were blending together. It was easy for Kai to fall into a rhythm of work, sleep, and the occasional quiet moment with Princess Lyra. But something had shifted recently, something he couldn't quite place. The station, once a place of calm and peace, now felt heavier. The discussions between diplomats, once full of hope and optimism, had taken on a more tense tone. The once steady hum of the station now seemed filled with a low, almost imperceptible hum of unrest. Kai could feel it in the air. There were whispers among the other diplomats, and even the crew members seemed on edge. Rumors swirled about the growing divisions between the various factions that called the station home. Tensions between the Zilara and the other alien races had been building for months. The Zilara had always been a proud people, but lately they seemed more distant, more unwilling to compromise, and it was clear that their royal family was no exception. Princess Lyra, though always quiet, had become an increasingly controversial figure. Kai had heard the talk in the corridors, the speculation that Lyra's silence was a power play, a refusal to engage with the other species. It was said that the Zalara, who were known for their strength and wisdom, had been preparing for a show of force. Diplomats from other races, including the Dracs, a fierce warrior species, and the Eloth, an ancient race with vast knowledge of the cosmos, had all expressed their concerns about the Zalara's growing isolationism. The station was meant to be a neutral ground for peace, but now it felt like the calm before the storm. It wasn't just the rumors that weighed on Kai. It was the growing distance between him and Lyra. She still sat in her usual spot by the window, staring out at the stars, but the connection they had once shared seemed to have faded. The quiet moments they shared no longer felt as peaceful. Lyra's eyes, once filled with a soft understanding, now seemed distant, as though her mind was somewhere far away. Kai couldn't blame her. The weight of her people's expectations, the pressure to maintain peace while also holding on to her people's pride, had to be immense. He had no idea what it must have been like for her, but he couldn't help but wonder if the silence between them was her way of coping. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling series of meetings with the station's council, Kai found himself walking down the hallway, lost in thought. The conversations that had taken place earlier were still fresh in his mind. He had been asked to mediate between the Zalara and the Eloth, but each party seemed to be growing less willing to listen. There was talk of military buildup, of alliances being forged behind closed doors. The diplomatic path was beginning to look more like a battlefield, and Kai felt like he was caught in the middle. His steps slowed as he approached Lyra's corner. She was sitting there, just as she always did, staring out at the stars. But something was different this time. There was an unfamiliar tension in her posture, a stiffness that hadn't been there before. Kai hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should interrupt her. But something in him urged him forward. The silence between them had been growing too thick, and Kai couldn't ignore it any longer. He walked over and sat down beside her, his heart pounding slightly. "Lyra," he said softly, "how are you?" For a long time, she didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the stars, and for a moment, Kai thought she hadn't heard him. But then, slowly, she turned her head toward him. Her eyes were tired, her expression unreadable. She looked at him for a moment, and then, without a word, she stood up and began to walk away. Kai's heart sank as she left him sitting there, the cold emptiness of her departure lingering in the air. The next few days were even more strained. Lyra avoided him completely. She no longer sat by the window, and Kai couldn't find her anywhere. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to her. What had happened? What had changed between them? The connection they had once shared seemed to have slipped through his fingers like sand, and Kai couldn't figure out how to get it back. The tension on the station continued to mount. Kai found himself caught in the middle of increasingly difficult negotiations. He tried to remain neutral, to listen to both sides and find a solution that would benefit everyone. But it was clear that the factions were growing more divided by the day. The Zalara were preparing for something, though no one knew exactly what it was. Their presence had become more formidable, their silence more pronounced. It was as though they were waiting for something, waiting for a reason to strike, to assert their power. One evening, as the tension reached its peak, Kai was summoned to an emergency council meeting. The representatives from the Dracs and the Eloth had arrived, both demanding answers from the Zalara. The meeting was set to be a confrontation, and Kai could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The room was filled with diplomats, military leaders, and advisors, all anxiously waiting for the Zalara delegation to arrive. The air was thick with anticipation, and Kai couldn't help but feel a sense of dread building in his chest. When the Zalara finally entered, they were silent, as always. Princess Lyra led the delegation, her presence commanding the room even without words. She walked to the center of the room, her eyes sweeping over the assembly. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of the other species. She simply stood there, waiting for someone to speak. Kai stepped forward, trying to calm the rising tension in the room. "Your Highness," he said, his voice steady but firm, "the station has become a place of growing unrest. Your silence, your refusal to engage with the other species, this is causing concern. We need to talk. We need to work together if we are to avoid conflict." Lyra didn't speak. She only stood there, her gaze locked with Kai's. There was something in her eyes, something that made Kai's heart race. It was as if she was trying to communicate with him, without words, without gestures. There was a pain in her eyes, a sadness that he hadn't noticed before. He couldn't help but feel that this was more than just politics for her. This was personal. The weight of her people's expectations, the pressure to protect them, to keep them from falling into chaos. It was too much for her to bear. The room was growing more restless as the silence stretched on. The representatives from the Drax and the Eoloth were becoming impatient. They wanted answers, and they wanted them now. But Kai couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lyra's silence than just pride. She was holding something back, something that could change everything. And it was clear that she wasn't going to speak, not unless she had to. Finally, one of the Drax representatives stood up. His voice was loud and commanding, filled with authority. "We've had enough of this!" he shouted. "The Zalara have been playing us for fools, using their silence as a weapon. It's time to make a stand." The room erupted into chaos, with voices shouting over one another, accusations flying in every direction. Kai stepped back, his mind racing. This was it, the moment when everything could fall apart. He had to do something, but he didn't know what. He felt trapped, caught between the different factions, each one pulling in a different direction. Through the noise, Kai caught a glimpse of Lyra. She was standing still, her face expressionless, but her eyes were searching for something. Someone. And in that moment, Kai understood. She wasn't waiting for the conflict to end. She was waiting for someone to stand beside her, someone to help her make sense of the chaos. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "Enough!" he shouted. "If we are to have any chance of peace, we must listen to each other. We can't keep fighting. Not like this." For a brief moment, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Kai, and then to Lyra. The tension was palpable, but for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of something else. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The space station had never felt so tense. Every day that passed, the shadows of unrest grew longer. Kai had done everything he could to keep the peace, to mediate between the warring factions, but now it felt like the walls of diplomacy were crumbling. It was as though each conversation, each effort, was nothing more than a temporary bridge over a vast chasm that was getting wider with every passing hour. But even amidst this chaos, Kai still found himself returning to the quiet corner where he had first sat with Lyra. She hadn't been there for days, not even once. Her absence was a silent echo, a reminder of the growing divide between her and the rest of the galaxy. The Zalara's silence had become their most powerful weapon, and had left everyone feeling uncertain and afraid. Kai couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward her, even now. The truth was, he couldn't help but wonder if the turmoil around them had affected her as much as it had affected him. She had always been calm, serene, but the more he thought about her, the more he realized how much she had been holding back. What had she been feeling all this time? Had the weight of her people's expectations finally worn her down? Was she just as lost as he was in the chaos surrounding them? He hadn't seen her since that last council meeting, when everything had nearly fallen apart. It had been a turning point. The Zalara were still refusing to speak openly, but something had shifted within Lyra during that meeting. Kai could see it in her eyes. The quiet sorrow, the deep weight of responsibility that no one could truly understand. And it was in that moment that he realized something profound. Lyra wasn't just a princess trapped by her own silence. She was a person who had been forced into a position she never asked for, a person who had been carrying the burdens of her people alone. For the first time, Kai could see that her silence wasn't a choice. It was a shield. A shield that had protected her, but had also isolated her from everyone around her. It was a defense mechanism, not a sign of arrogance or pride. And Kai couldn't help but feel the need to help her, to stand by her side and offer her the support she had so long denied herself. He didn't know how to do it, how to reach her in a way that didn't feel like he was intruding. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something had to change, that there had to be a way to break through the walls that had been built around them both. It was late one evening when Kai finally found her. He was walking down the same corridor where they had first met, his mind full of questions and uncertainty. As he turned the corner, he saw her sitting there, just as she had so many times before, staring out at the stars. The quiet corner had become her refuge, a place where she could escape from the noise of the world, if only for a moment. Kai hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was the right time. He had no idea what had happened since their last meeting. No idea what she had been going through, but he knew that he couldn't just stand there, not when he had the chance to talk to her, to connect with her in a way that was long overdue. "Lyra," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness of the room. "Can we talk?" She didn't look at him right away, but after a moment, she slowly turned her head. Her eyes were tired, filled with the same sadness he had seen in them before. But this time, there was something else there too. Something that Kai couldn't quite place. It was a vulnerability, an openness that hadn't been there before. She didn't speak, but her gaze seemed to invite him closer, to tell him that it was okay, that he wasn't intruding. So he walked over and sat beside her. The silence between them felt different now, more comfortable, like they had both grown used to each other's presence over the past few weeks. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The stars outside the window continued to shine, their light reflecting off the smooth surface of the station. It was as if the whole universe was waiting for them to find the words that had been missing for so long. Finally, Kai spoke again, his voice soft and unsure.
"I don't know what to say, but I feel like we're running out of time. The station is falling apart.
The peace that we worked so hard for is slipping through our fingers. I can't do it alone, Lyra. I need you to help me. I need you to speak, to break your silence, not for me, but for everyone." Lyra's eyes never left his, but there was no immediate response. She simply sat there, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Kai wondered if she would ever speak, if she would ever say anything at all. But as he sat there, watching her, something unexpected happened. Lyra's hand slowly moved toward his, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they brushed against his. It was the first time she had ever initiated any physical contact, and it took Kai by surprise. He felt the warmth of her touch, a simple gesture that spoke louder than any words could. Her fingers lingered on his for a moment, and then, without a word, she withdrew her hand and turned back to the stars. The moment had passed, but something had changed. The silence between them was no longer an obstacle. It was a bridge, a silent understanding that connected them in ways they hadn't yet fully realized. Kai didn't know what to make of her gesture, but he couldn't deny the connection he felt. He could feel her pain, her struggle to maintain control, to uphold the expectations of her people. She was trapped in a role she never asked for, and her silence was both a shield and a prison. He understood now that she wasn't just holding herself back from the galaxy. She was holding herself back from everyone, including herself. For the next few days, Kai kept a distance, unsure of what had changed, unsure of how to move forward. He tried to focus on his work, on the negotiations that were still ongoing, but his mind was constantly drawn back to Lyra. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something important, something that could change everything. But he didn't know how to reach her. Then, one day, everything came to a head. The situation on the station had become critical. The Zilara had made their intentions clear. If peace wasn't reached soon, they would take matters into their own hands. The other factions were preparing for the worst, and the council called for an emergency meeting to address the escalating conflict. Kai knew that this was their last chance. their last opportunity to prevent full-scale war. As he entered the meeting room, he saw Lyra standing at the front, her regal presence filling the space. She was silent as ever, her eyes focused on the floor, but there was something different about her now. Her posture was no longer stiff, no longer guarded. It was as if she had let go of something that had been weighing her down for so long. Without thinking, Kai stepped forward. He knew this was the moment. He couldn't do it alone anymore. He couldn't be the diplomat, the mediator. He needed her. He needed her strength, her wisdom, and most of all, her voice. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We can't keep doing this. We can't keep hiding behind silence. The galaxy is falling apart, and we need to work together. I need you to speak, to be the leader you were born to be." The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to Lyra. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes met Kai's, and for the first time they weren't filled with sadness or resignation. They were filled with something else, something he had never seen before. Lyra took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in what seemed like forever, she spoke. "I will not be silent any more," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I will not let my people or this station fall apart because of my silence. If we are to survive, we must work together, and I will do my part." The room was stunned into silence, but Kai felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. They had done it. And in that moment, he knew that together, they could save the peace they had fought so hard to maintain.